Good evening, everyone. It is August 10th, Thursday, and time for today's PM edition of C2-A-Days from campus2canton.com. I am Nicholas Ian Allen. Today is one of those days where there is a ton to discuss. I keep all my notes in a Google sheet, as anybody who knows me is I'm sure not surprised by that. But I've been counting or taking note of how many lines of information there are in each episode. And today, I think, is a new record. We're up to 120 or so lines. And it's one of those days, though, where I wonder how much of this information is truly new or actionable, because we're getting into that point in fall camp. I mean, it's double digit days for a lot of teams now. The second full week, towards the end of the second full week, we're coming up on scrimmages and things like that. If a team hasn't gotten there yet, there certainly have been some scrimmage notes that we've discussed and will discuss. But we're getting to the point where things are starting to maybe crystallize a little on the depth chart for some teams. Quarterback battles certainly are ongoing. I'm sure that coaches have a better understanding of what direction they want to go. The team probably knows in a lot of cases which way they want to go, but it's not that we're not that likely to hear any official word on many of those battles. And that's going to sort of lead today a few different situations, as I was trying to dig into quotes from coaches and other notes, analysis by the many talented and hardworking people who are going through and writing about these teams, covering them, reporting them, their boots on the ground type information gatherers, doing the best that they can. But will we actually learn what direction things are going in an official way? Probably not. Nevertheless, starting at Texas A&M, Olin Buchanan of Texags wrote a piece today responding to a press conference and some quotes that Bobby Petrino had a few days ago. He mentions and starts with, based on years past, Jimbo Fisher, the head coach at Texas A&M, typically announces his starting quarterback in about 2 weeks from today. Last year, as Buchanan mentioned, Haynes King was named the starter on August 27th. The year before that, the announcement came on August 25th. So we're still 2 weeks away from that. Nevertheless, Connor Wegman is, by all accounts, the favorite to win this job. Yes, there's been some competition in spring camp. Max Johnson has played well, according to other reports that we have mentioned. But Wegman seems to have, earned his spot atop the depth chart with his strong finish to last year. And at least according to Buchanan's reading of a particular quote from Petrino, probably has it more or less locked down. The quote itself here is that Connor has a quick release and can get the ball out accurately and fast. And Buchanan focused on those final two words, accurate and fast. And if you have heard coaches talk about quarterbacks in the past, at all levels of football, those are two of the things that you're going to hear over and over and over from quarterback coaches. What they put at the very, very, top of their list as far as attributes, criteria that they're looking for, is someone who is accurate with the football and makes a decision quickly, makes the right decision, of course, but makes it quickly. And if Connor Wegman has, an edge in both of those, two attributes compared to Max Johnson at this point, I can't really argue that perhaps that's going to give him the edge in that job. Another high-profile quarterback competition This one maybe a little more neck and neck. Joey Kaufman of the Columbus Dispatch was on hand for an interview with head coach Ryan Day at Ohio State, who, of course, has an ongoing quarterback battle between Kyle McCord and Devin Brown there in Columbus. Unsurprisingly, we didn't get a whole lot of insight on specifically, who's ahead of who. Day said, and quoting here via Kaufman, I don't know, but I will say that I think by this time next week, we'll have some more clarity on where we're going. So there is, I believe, a scrimmage on Saturday for the Buckeyes, and typically those are informative. That can give us a little bit of information, not necessarily even from a who takes the first snap or who's practicing with the first or second team, although those certainly can be valuable pieces of information. But how is the team responding to a particular player is something I would certainly love to know if a reporter is able to gather that type of information. If a scrimmage at Ohio State or anywhere else is open to the public, we know. Switching gears on a tangent a little bit, Alabama's got a scrimmage on Saturday as well, which is certainly not open to the public, so not likely to pick up any of that type of information. But getting back to Ohio State, another quote from Day: "It's a good battle. It's back and forth for sure, and they know this week is important to them. The scrimmage on Saturday, there we go, will be important. And they're constantly putting up good numbers on a daily basis. So we'll compare the statistics, but there's also the eyeball test. They're both competing at a high level." So most folks that I have followed, and I tend to agree, expect that Kyle McCord has a slight edge in this competition. But Devin Brown, of course, is a highly talented player. I know the team at Campus to Canton has been particularly high on Brown. Certainly there are some McCord fans as well, but it seems as though McCord probably is going to get the week one nod. Would be a little bit of a surprise if Brown is able to surpass him this fall, but that doesn't mean, if McCord takes that first snap at Indiana on September 2nd, doesn't mean that it's his job and that's it. There certainly could be a scenario where these two continue to compete as Ohio State looks ahead. The first few weeks, there's certainly some maybe sneaky tough teams on the schedule. Western Kentucky, Notre Dame, of course, that trip to South Bend looms. But by that October 7th date, when Big Ten play really starts to heat up, you would expect, if not before, if McCord hasn't nailed it down or if Brown hasn't wrestled it away, that's probably when we'll know for sure. But until then, we could continue to get a lot of these type of quotes. So another area of interest for Ohio State is the offensive line, who's going to be blocking for McCord and or Brown. And then, of course, Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams, and that deep and talented Ohio State backfield. There seem to be 4 players in the mix for 2 starting tackle jobs. Another quick quote from Day: "If we make those decisions now, it's going to be harder to make them 2 weeks down the road. If we don't make those decisions now, it's going to be harder to make those 2 weeks down the road." So kind of saying something a little bit different in a similar situation where it sounds like Ryan Day really would like to find out who his top 2 tackles are going to be, because it's just going to get more difficult from here on out. So we'll, of course, see how it plays out. Ohio State's week 1 opponent, Indiana. Sounds like they're in a pretty similar situation at the quarterback position, according to Michael Nizolik of the Herald Times. Both Brendan Sorsby and Taven Jackson are still splitting reps evenly with both the first and second team offense. That is according to head coach Tom Allen, and the Hoosiers are 6 practices in to this point. Quote from Allen via Nizolik: "It's an equal rotation. They're just rotating, going with the ones and the twos. That's how they've been working, and that will continue. Niziolek also mentioned, gave a reminder that Tom Allen said at Big Ten Media Days that he doesn't want to tip his hand, doesn't want to give Ohio State any extra bit of information. So don't expect any form of announcement from Indiana on the starting quarterback prior to kickoff in week 1. Boston College, somewhat similarly, but having to try to read between the lines maybe a little bit more. There are of course some great outlets covering Boston College. AJ Black and the Eagle Insider, which is a 247 site, mentioned in a recent write-up that freshman wide receiver Jaden Skeet was one of the freshmen that head coach Jeff Hafley praised, has already been working with the ones and twos. That's not a surprise. We mentioned a note from the official team website who is giving some very, very small snippets of practice updates. But anytime a true freshman is, making a move to compete for a starting spot, I think it's worth noting. And then on that note, with the official site trying to read on, who's taking snaps in which period, Emmett Morehead has been the first quarterback name mentioned anytime I've noticed. That should not surprise anyone. But Thomas Castellanos, it sounds like, the transfer from UCF, according to who he's throwing passes to in these reports, and just the almost immediate mention of Castellanos after that first Morehead mention makes me think that Castellanos is a real part of this competition, of a battle. Morehead might have an edge, might clearly be the first guy up in reps each day, but one particular word that caught my eye about Castellanos in this write-up was that he looked explosive on the ground all morning. And Castellanos, very athletic quarterback, gives a little bit of a different, has a little bit of a different skill set than Morehead, who we think of as being more of a pocket passer. So me trying to, speculate how this may play out, especially when they're two quarterbacks who, kind of have different strengths. Seems like maybe both will play. So kind of a little bit of a different situation than Ohio State, where, you would expect that whoever wins is going to run a very similar offense, what we're used to seeing from Ryan Day, depending on, how it shakes out at Boston College. And BC does have, at least on paper, a couple of games where they should be favored and might have an opportunity to figure things out before hosting Florida State in week 3. We might see different packages, might see sort of a different style, not necessarily style of offense, but there'll be a little bit different philosophy from a play calling standpoint. If Morehead is your guy, or if Castellanos is more taking charge, maybe giving a little bit higher ceiling potentially with his big playability on the ground. So we'll see, of course, how it shakes out. But with guys like Ryan O'Keefe and Joseph Griffin, Jaden Williams, and then it sounds like the true freshman Skitty in the mix. There's some weapons to work with there at Boston College, and a pretty manageable schedule as well. At Washington, we alluded to the fact that on Wednesday, Michael Penix Jr. sat out for the 3rd consecutive practice. We talked about it a little bit this morning in our G5 roundup in the AM edition. But according to Mike Varell of the Seattle Times, Penix was dressed in full pads, appeared to be uninjured, and did throw during some individual drills, just didn't, it sounds like, take any live reps. So there again was an opportunity for the 2nd and 3rd quarterback on the depth chart to get a little more a little more opportunity, practice reps. Dylan Morris continues, it sounds like, to play well. Connected on a 55-yard touchdown with Roma Dunze, who apparently just had a huge practice. But then also the true freshman, Austin Mack, is getting a little extra opportunity as well to see what he can do. There was another note that I found interesting and actually kind of contradicts something that we said last night, I believe. Michael Chavez of the Seattle Times reported about a conversation with offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb and the running back situation. We noted from a report from a different outlet that covers the Huskies that it really sounded like Will Nixon was in the mix, maybe to get reps with the first team offense, and it's very possible that he will. I mean, a lot of teams rotate 2, 3, 4 running backs at different points, and Nixon has a little bit different skill set. Does have a wide receiver background specifically. Sounds like he's also put on some weight, a little more physical of a runner than perhaps he had been in the past. But coming into the fall, it sounded, or at least a lot of CFF-minded folks seem to gravitate a little bit more toward Dylan Johnson, the transfer from Mississippi State. He's been the first of this group drafted pretty frequently from what I've seen all preseason. Nevertheless, getting back to the interview with Ryan Grubb, Grubb was quoted here by Chavez as saying that Cameron Davis is the number one. So, quote, he's our one. I mean, it's not very close right now. He is the guy that has all of it. I mean, you look back, you could argue one of the most important plays of the season, talking about 2022, was his catch on third down against Oregon State. That was a 97-yard game-winning drive, as Chavez pointed out. He's the complete package. So that's different, right? I mean, Cameron Davis is the most experienced player coming back from last year's running back group. Shouldn't be a surprise. He actually has been the top running back listed in the CFB Winning Edge team profiles for Washington. But admittedly, I was not very opinionated on whether or not he would be able to stay there. I thought that it very well could be Dylan Johnson who emerged. So do need to move Will Nixon up a little bit because it sounds like he's in that top tier, that top group of 3. But at least as of now, and taking that quote verbatim, Ryan Grubb says that Cameron Davis is our number one, and it's not close, not very close. So an interesting note, a little bit different than how I interpreted what we read earlier this week. There were some players who missed practice at Washington. This is again according to Varel. A couple of defensive linemen, safety, tight end Ryan Otten apparently missed practice on Wednesday. The quotes from the coaching staff said, just a little sore, being cautious. So we shall see, but also a receiver that we made note of earlier this week where there was a big feature talking about his progress as a young player. Denzel Boston apparently also was limited. So just an item of note there. At Georgia, there were interviews today with a couple of coaches on staff, offensive coordinator Mike Bobo and running backs coach Del McGee, reading up on what Jake Rowe of Dogs HQ, the On3 site, reported. McGee was asked about Mike Bobo. He used the word sponge to describe Bobo when working under Todd Monken last year. Said that Mike Bobo is going to implement his own style, but that the offense itself has been status quo. So that is not a surprise. I know other people have said this as well. I've mentioned it a couple of times in some other spaces. Georgia, it seems, is now one of those places, kind of like Alabama. We've discussed this a little bit in recent, the last couple of weeks doing the show, that now the offense there just sort of is the Georgia offense. Mike Bobo certainly was the play caller at Georgia a while ago, has led other offenses at places like Auburn and South Carolina, where didn't necessarily put up huge numbers. Colorado State had some success when he was the head coach there early on, but it sounds like, at least if these quotes are to be believed, and I do personally believe it, that the offense that we're going to see from Georgia in 2023 is going to be a lot closer to what we saw under Todd Monken in recent years than what we saw from Mike Bobo, either previously in his career at Georgia or in the places that he spent some time while, after leaving Georgia to take that Colorado State head coaching job. Other mentions from McGee, of course, he talked about the running back position. We talked earlier this week about the injuries that have started to pile up a little bit there, but there is some depth. Cash Jones continues to receive a lot of positive sentiment. According to McGee, Jones is one of the strongest players on the team, pound for pound, and that he can be, quote, somewhat of a matchup problem. Compared him to both James Cook and Kenny McIntosh, which is an interesting comparison to make. So it certainly will be fun to see if and how Cash Jones potentially takes advantage of the opportunity that could have created itself for additional playing time early in the season if Georgia is a little bit limited at the running back position. But of course, McGee also said that Dejon Edwards and Savon Clark have taken on a bigger load in practice as well. That the group is deep, but of course, as any coach will say, has a long way to go. Moving on to the discussion with Mike Bobo, he sort of reemphasized a lot of the things that McGee said about working with Monken, learning from Monken. There was kind of an interesting note on what might be different, what Bobo maybe picked up in the last year working with Monken that wasn't necessarily as big a part of his offensive philosophy or play calling strategy prior to that. He mentioned adding more shifts and motions. So pre-snap shifts, motions. This is me now speculating, talking about, trading the tight end, things like that to mess with the defense's strength call, that sort of thing. That can make things a little more difficult. It's just one more thing for a defense to have to worry about, to teach in a given week. And so some fans hate it, at LSU, and Matt Canada was calling plays there. And obviously at Orgeron, it sounds like wasn't a big fan. But it's one of those things when, done well, can kind of annoy a defense or make things a little more different, a little more difficult, perhaps, create some mismatches, also, set up some angles on blocks, things like that. So will be interesting to see that Mike Bobo, it sounds like, is going to be implementing some more motion on offense pre-snap, perhaps than he did in the past. But again, to the original note that the offense at Georgia is going to be, for the most part, sounds like the same. Bobo apparently specifically said that the terminology, keeping it the same, has been a priority. So that's another great sign that we're not going to see any wholesale changes there at Georgia. Some unfortunate notes. A few wide receivers, it sounds like, have potentially been impacted by injury at Wisconsin. Jeff Petrokis of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel tweeted out earlier Thursday afternoon that Will Pauling, who of course has been the top slot receiver in what's a very valuable piece of Phil Longo's offense, suffered a bit of a knee injury. He apparently knocked knees, it sounds like, with another player. So, in one sense, that's better perhaps than a lot of the non-contact injuries that we discuss far too often. So maybe that'll cost Pauling a little bit of practice time. Could certainly, depending on the the level of impact, or if it caused any additional damage, could certainly carry over into the season. It'll very much be worth watching. But it sounded like that Pauling, and this is now according to Jesse Temple of The Athletic, did not participate the rest of the practice, but did return to the field afterward with an ice pack taped to his right knee. So we will certainly need to keep an eye on that situation. The severity is currently unknown, but with Pauling out, at least for the rest of today's practice, Skylar Bell stepped up and took the first team reps at the slot. Vinny Anthony then stepped up to be the second slot receiver for the Badgers. Temple also noted and has said that the top playmaker of the day at the wide receiver position seems to rotate pretty frequently across a long list of guys. And Chimere Dike, who quite honestly, in my opinion, is still maybe the player to beat as far as most productive. I know the history of the slot position with Phil Longo. It probably is not as overrated at Wisconsin as I often think it can be when you're trying to differentiate or trying to guess or deduce who's going to be most productive based on whether they play in the slot or not. But DK, I think, is still probably the most talented receiver. Certainly the most experienced. Maybe CJ Williams has got the most raw talent, but regardless, so far Wisconsin has had a pretty good showing, it sounds like, from a different player stepping up and making plays each day. Will Pauling was certainly part of that, and we will have to keep a real eye on when, and I mean, say if, but when he's able to return to practice, hopefully sooner rather than later. There were a few other injury updates from Petroikis players we've mentioned before. Ches Malusi, backup running back, still dealing with head injury, wore a non-contact jersey, got minimal work, but sounds like back on the field. Perhaps that's a good sign. Though he did recording, according to this tweet, mostly worked on the side with a trainer. The highly productive linebacker Maema Jongmeta, who sat out on Wednesday, according to Petroikis, was there with a large club on his hand that looked like Thor's hammer, according to Petroikis, but sounded like, when we heard the news earlier in the week, that it probably wasn't an injury that was going to keep him off the field come game time. So still an important item to keep an eye on. At Texas, this was a tweet from Anwar Richardson, who referenced Alex Dunlap. Haven't seen a whole lot of detail on this, but according to this tweet earlier on Thursday, Xavier Worthy was, quote, a little banged up and held out of practice on Thursday. Says it doesn't seem serious, but still, big play receiver, in line to be probably the most productive receiver in that Texas offense, and worth monitoring. Hopefully the report is true, that it's not serious. We've mentioned that Texas kind of has a top 4 or 5 player group that's rotating in for the most part with the starters alongside Worthy. It's a Donnie Mitchell, the transfer from Georgia, Jordan Whittington, returning starter. Casey Kane is in the mix, Isaiah Nair, the transfer from Wyoming, who missed all last season with injury, and then Jonte Cook, the freshman, has in recent days broken into that group. But still, hopefully Worthy will be back and be able to lead that unit. There were some notes from Chip Brown of Horns 247 about the running back situation. On Wednesday, there was a chat on the site where a question was asked about Jadon Blue. Brown said that he talked to a team source who said that Blue is, quote, working his ass off to show he deserves a spot in this year's rotation. We mentioned earlier this week or maybe towards the end of last week that Jonathan Brooks has consistently been the top player, as far as getting those number one reps. CJ Baxter has moved into that number two role. Keelan Robinson is sort of the outside guy, gives a little bit different skill set. Sounds like Blue perhaps is trying to show that he can factor into some of those things that Keelan Robinson, or actually, pardon, it sounds like Blue is trying to avoid being typecast or whatever the correct word is, being just that outside guy, wants to develop into a little bit more of a between the tackles type runner. And sounds like perhaps there's some optimism as far as that goes. One interesting note towards the very end of Brown's piece, reading from it, says, I was told as well Quinn Ewers has been performing in the first week of camp. Malik Murphy has been, quote, equally as good. So I'm not expecting Quinn Ewers to lose his grip on the job, but every time you see Malik Murphy's name in print, it's in a positive way. So just something to note there. At Duke, I thought it was an interesting mention by Connor O'Neill of Devils Illustrated, the rival site there, gave a real in-depth description of what he called the catch of the day from Jordan Moore. Jordan Moore is a personal favorite of mine. He's been probably a bit underrated most of this offseason in CFF drafts and things like that. But reading again from this report says it's hard to imagine anybody at Duke has a better catch than this one in fall camp or in the season, really. Talking about Riley Leonard here. Leonard fired from deep around midfield to Moore, who was blanketed in coverage by Blades, referring to the transfer Al Blades from Miami. Blades was face guarding Moore and was flagged for pass interference, who reached around Blades with his right hand, got his hand on the ball, kind of tipped it to himself, and while falling, managed to cradle it for a catch. Says that he thought it was a touchdown, but regardless, maybe couldn't get the close-up view. It was remarkable as far as hand-eye coordination, body control, and then again, O'Neill saying, add in the fact this guy was competing to be the starting quarterback a year ago. Ridiculous. That's part of my reasoning as to why Moore is my favorite at Duke, ahead of even Jalen Calhoun, who was a bit more productive, has been more of a presence in that wide receiver group. But Moore this time last year was still competing with Riley Leonard, and according to reports was pretty close to making a move for that job. He transitioned to wide receiver late in the fall camp or early in the season, and then came on really strong toward the end of the year. And you have to think now, with Riley Leonard establishing himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC, that Moore has been able to focus on wide receiver, I would expect, is going to take a pretty noticeable step forward as a junior and as a second year now receiver. So he's certainly, I think, one to watch. At Auburn, just a very quick note from Nathan King of Auburn Undercover. We've talked about which quarterbacks with the ones, the twos, the threes. In the most recent practice that King observed, Peyton Thorne was number one. Robbie Ashford was with the number twos. Jarquez Hunter was with the first team at running back, but he split some time there with a name that I haven't seen with that first team group yet. That is Sean Jackson. The second team group apparently consisted of Jeremiah Cobb, Damari Alston, and Brian Battie. We still don't know yet if Hunter is going to face any sort of discipline, missing time early in the season. But since returning to practice after missing the first couple, he has been consistently spotted with the number one unit, though splitting time with at least one other running back. The wide receiver group, a little bit interesting that the first three noted here by King were Nick Mardner, the transfer from Cincinnati, the big 6'6" target. Caleb Burton, perhaps not surprising, another transfer there, and Omari Kelly. A little bit of potentially unexpected note there. Sophomore, played fewer than 10% of snaps at Auburn last season. But there, of course, was a mention that Coy Moore was in a non-contact uh, jersey. He's dealing with an ankle injury. Javaris Johnson was not spotted during the media viewing period, so that could have certainly been an impact as well. And there were some mentions of lack of mention of Camden Brown, and King, felt wanted to point out that when it comes to pace and walkthrough stuff, a lot of focus is on newer and less experienced players at skill spots. That's why you haven't seen much of Johnson as well. Cam Brown is one of the best receivers. You'll probably start to see him more as they trim things down. But Brown wasn't mentioned anywhere in these, two deep wide receiver groups. But as we often say, perhaps it's just one drill, just one small snippet of practice that the media gets to view. So good not to read too much into it, perhaps like we did with the Washington running back situation earlier in the week. At Arkansas, similar rundown from Andrew Ellis of Hog Sports, the 247 site, mentioned the groups in the opening period, what they do call a fastball period on Thursday. The wide receivers were Samuel Mbeke, Andrew Armstrong, and Isaiah Satanga, with tight end Luke Hass. At quarterback, but apparently Jacoby Criswell has been performing quite well as the number 2 quarterback, adding some depth there behind KJ Anderson. But next to him at running back was AJ Green, of course, Rocket Sanders being with the first team. The wide receivers, Tyrone Broden, Isaac Tesla, and Bryce Stevens in the slot. Ty Washington was the number 2 tight end with that group, with Nathan Bax being the number 3 tight end. Rashad Dubinion, was with the third team running back, which has been fairly consistent so far. Quick note on wide receiver Adam Randall at Clemson, according to Anna Adams of Clemson 247, who was there for a Dabo Swinney press conference. Dabo quoting here, Adam is stacking days. He's making plays, being consistent, not making mental errors, practicing fast. His endurance seems good. He just seems healthy and he's moving well. There's really nothing not to like at this point. Just praying he stays healthy, because if he's on the field, he's going to make some plays for us. So good to note that perhaps Adam Randall is a little closer to full speed than what we saw last year when he returned so quickly from that injury. At Illinois Inquirer, Jeremy Warner made note of the depth chart, or at least the pecking order that he was able to view in drills on Thursday. The first team unit on offense, quarterback Luke Altmaier, running back Reggie Love. That was maybe not the biggest surprise. I personally have been a Josh McCray fan since he kind of exploded onto the scene as a true freshman, was significantly limited by injury. Last year, Reggie Love was able to get a little more playing time, and McCray did not, look healthy when we were able to get a glimpse at him. There are some, whispers, rumors. I know there were some reports out of the spring that Love perhaps had a slight edge in the competition, but that perhaps we're going to see a little more of a share of the duties at running back than we have seen in years past. I still haven't been able to help myself personally when it comes to CFF drafts. I have taken Josh McCray early and often, have tried to sprinkle in Reggie Love a little bit here and there too, but maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part. But I do think that McCray, one, just really impressed me as a freshman. Hope that we're going to see him back and fully healthy again. Do think that he's capable of taking on a heavy workload if asked, but at least as, Warner pointed out, now has not certainly solidified himself as the number 1 running back. At Florida, Kevin Brockway of the Gainesville Sun noted that the Gators are scrimmaging Thursday, but are also dealing with some injuries, have been this week. At the cornerback position, Jason Marshall Jr., a returning starter, linebacker Scooby Williams, who we expect to be a two-deep performer, were out at the open portion of practice on Wednesday. Also, Brockway noted that Dante Zanders, the tight end, offensive lineman Richie Leonard IV, were in non-contact jerseys, and offensive lineman Lindell Hudson Jr. Was out after suffering an injury in a car accident. So that's worth noting. In our projected depth charts for Florida, have had Hudson penciled in as a starter. Incoming transfer, a position of need for Florida. He and the cornerback Marshall, both projected starters, and Zanders, certainly could be as well. Was a starter last year. So, though we're hearing some good things out of Florida about Graham Mertz, his accuracy, a lot to like about the running backs there, the young wide receivers. But there are some other issues worth monitoring injury-wise on both sides of the line of scrimmage. At TCU, just a few quick notes. Stephen M. Johnson tweeted that Chandler Morris mentioned Jalen Robinson as one of the guys who's been making a lot of plays on offense. We're, of course, interested in who's going to be the top target for Morris in what has been a pretty prolific offensive situation. Savion Williams was mentioned in a report by Jeremy Clark of Frog Blitz, Horn Frog Blitz, 247 site. Said he's very active when it comes to individual drills and install, just not doing full team periods yet. All the reps have gone to Jalen Robinson, DJ Allen, and Chase Jackson at his particular position. Did mention that Cordell Russell had the catch of the day in a one-on-one period where he, quote, skied over Mason White for a touchdown. And then there was a note at the running back position that Imani Bailey got the bulk of the running back reps with the number one unit on Tuesday, but that Trey Sanders did not practice in what was termed a load management day. So seeing more of that, as we've said before. At Boise State, there was a interview with the top two running backs there, George Halani and Ashton Jeanty. Rachel Roberts of the Idaho Statesman had some quotes from both George Halani and new offensive coordinator Bush Hamdan. This is Halani speaking, quote, "We use many different formations where we're both in the backfield and either of us can get it. One of us can get it and one can run the option. We also have Ashton running outside, running routes out there and running sweeps and stuff like that. It's pretty crazy how we utilize this offense." So George Halani, in my opinion, has been perhaps a little bit of a forgotten man. Still, even in this particular write-up by Roberts, was referred to as the starter, and Jeanty was referred to as the backup. Nevertheless, good news to hear that they're both potentially going to be on the field at the same time. And Roberts also mentioned a quote from earlier this summer where Bush Hamdan said that he expected Halani and Jeanty to both get between 12 and 15 carries per game. So potentially, even though Halani maybe is technically the starter, Jeanty, everyone's favorite backup, and certainly has a very bright future and a high ceiling. But it sounds like they're, for the most part, going to split a lot of time and touches as well. But good news that Jeanty is perhaps going to be involved a little bit more as a receiver and perhaps utilized in some more interesting ways. There was a pretty in-depth write-up on the Kansas State running back situation by Kellis Robinette of the Kansas City Star, who pointed out, and something that might have eluded us in recent weeks, it says it's easy to forget that Kansas State head coach Chris Kleiman prefers to use a committee approach in the backfield. We got pretty used to seeing Deuce Vaughn being featured, in a variety of different ways, but pretty consistently just, the go-to player for K-State in the last 3 seasons, basically. But history and Kleiman's background shows that pretty often he's used multiple running backs, and Robinette, quoted both Kleiman and running backs coach Brian Anderson talking about that, we should expect to see multiple running backs split the workload. The top 2 players that are likely to get those first opportunities are the transfer from Florida State, Treshaun Ward, as well as the returner, DJ Giddens. So those 2 are probably likely the top 2 on the depth chart. I would expect in that order. And according to coaches so far, and I guess unless one truly establishes themselves as a special player, not that they're going to be able to repeat what Deuce Vaughn did, but as of right now, the plan is probably to get the 2 of them to split reps. But there was mentioned that Anthony Frias and Joe Jackson were both also in the mix, and it sounds like the coaching staff would actually like to have 3 or 4 running backs, not just the top 2. One note, I believe we mentioned this in one of our very first shows, but following up Michael Goins of Go PowerCat, the 247 Kansas State site, Christian Duffy, the starting right tackle, has been out basically since the start of fall camp. He is a 35-game starter, and the first sort of note or prediction on how long he will be out that I've seen was Goins mentioning that circling the bye week between September 24th and 30th. So that would mean that Kansas State, and as they're trying to figure out the running back situation there, maybe working without one of their 5 returning starters on the offensive line. So that should be a unit of strength. Cooper Beebe is arguably the best, certainly interior lineman in college football, but an area to watch that they will be a little bit shorthanded, it sounds like, through the first month of the season. Another quick offensive line note at Tennessee, Adam Sparks of the Knoxville News-Sentinel noted that center Cooper Mays had a minor procedure, according to head coach Josh Heupel. Mays should be back for the opener against Virginia, but Ollie Lane has stepped in and was getting the first team snaps at center in the recent scrimmage there. At Purdue, Tom Deinhardt of Golden Black, the On3 site, gave a long list of injuries or players who've been missing practice for a variety of reasons. We have mentioned Jamal Edrine, the incoming transfer from FAU, who's going to be out for the year with an ACL injury. Not sure anybody else listed here is going to be out for the season, but Gus Hartwig, starting center, and Josh Kaltenberger, an offensive lineman in the 2 deep at least, were out. 2 other offensive linemen were mentioned. Tight end Max Clare, wide receiver Deion Burks have been missing practice recently. Wide receiver Marshawn Rice has missed multiple practices, though Deinhardt says not believed to be anything of concern, but we'll see. And listed half a dozen defensive players who have been missing multiple practices. So Purdue, coming off a strong season, new head coach, a lot of turnover, and it sounds like dealing with quite a few, at least nicks and bruises, if not anything more serious beyond the Edrine injury. But Purdue perhaps a little impacted as far as depth goes at this point. And just prior to us going live, Travis Hines of the Des Moines Register reported that Iowa State running back Jarrell Brock is one of 4 more starters who's been charged in the ongoing gambling probe. That probably not much of a surprise. We've seen quotes that Brock was not practicing, but it sounds like of course, Hunter Deckers, the quarterback, was charged. We learned a week or more ago. But on Thursday, charged with tampering of records, according to Hines, were fellow players Isaiah Lee, Deshaun Hanukkah, the tight end, which is a name new to me, and Jacob Rimsberg, offensive lineman. So news of note there, because Hanukkah was, it was the most productive from a receiving standpoint at the tight end position. Maybe opens the door for Easton Dean to take on a bigger role. But Jarrell Brock officially or now reported to have been charged, gives us a little more idea that the running back situation is going to be handed over to Cartavius Norton, Eli Sanders, the incoming transfer Arlen Harris. Sounds like a lot of guys are in the mix behind Norton there. But Brock, who, according to this report from Hines, bet on Iowa State games, including games in which he played, could face a permanent NCAA ban. So long list of notes today, a long show. Thank you very much for sticking with us. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more, we'll learn a little bit more in the days and weeks to come about some of these quarterback situations, some of these depth chart clues that we try to pick up here and there. But if there are things that we've missed or things that you would like us to follow up, please reach out to me at CFP Winning Edge on Twitter. You can, of course, find me in the Campus to Canton Discord as well, and try to be fairly active and respond to any depth chart projections or questions, things like that, in the C2C Winning Edge tier channel of the Discord. So again, I'm Nicholas Ian Allen for campustocanton.com. Hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you in the morning for the AM edition of C2-A-Days.